Welcome to everyone. We're very pleased to have people from the Park Hill community joining us tonight. This is a usual meeting of our men's group that meets twice a month. I'm Larry Ricketts, and a member of the men's group and also a member of the church. We've invited church members, the men's group, and people from the community to come tonight, so we're absolutely delighted for those of you who are here. We're pleased to welcome Cole Chandler. For those of you who don't know, as I said, it's an open meeting. And Cole has a Master's of Divinity from Baylor University. Cole's life work has been in serving the underserved, both by feeding and housing people experiencing homelessness. Cole was the executive director of Colorado Village Collaborative and then served for 1 year in the Colorado Department of Health and Human Services, serving again and directing homelessness resolution and prevention strategies. He's presently senior advisor for homelessness resolution for the city of Denver. As I said, you should be aware, Assist to Hearing helped us get this loop fixed, so I want to give a plug for Assist to Hearing and how much they helped us. A little bit of background for tonight's presentation. Guests who are not members of this church should know we have a long history in this church of serving as a place of safety and as a part of our women's homelessness initiative. Cole comes as a guest of the men's group and our church community. All folk from Greater Park Hill, I'm sure, will join us in welcoming Cole in a safe and respectful manner in this sanctuary space, because as we know, and Cole knows especially, this topic gets a lot of emotion from the community. Our men's group, I should say, Cole, has various and varied opinions on every main current topic that you can think of. And we've never shied away from disagreements or disagreeing, but we've never been disagreeable, I don't think, to any guest or any one of our own in the men's group. Cole, would you please bring us up to date on the aspirations of the city administration to ameliorate or provide solutions to homelessness and aspirations for affordable housing in Denver? Sorry I threw that one at you, but I know it's a part of what you plan to do in strategies. There'll be adequate time, Cole knows, for questions and answers and dialogue. Don't forget to turn your mic on.
All right, good evening, everyone. We've done about 60 town halls over the last 130, 140 days on this topic. I don't always get a round of applause when I'm introduced, so grateful for that tonight. The last time I was in this church, I was taking a Facing Racism cohort with Soul to Soul sisters. I think it was back in 2019, which is like a lifetime ago. I didn't have children, there was no pandemic. I was happily working at a small startup nonprofit, and now everything in my life has changed. And I think also just as I'm centering myself in this space, want to acknowledge people that have come before me in this work. The amazing former city councilwoman, Robin Kanich, who is someone I've looked up to for a long time and is one of your neighbors here in Park Hill. And also the amazing Blake Chambliss, who was at the table when we were doing some original organizing around what became the Colorado Village Collaborative. Somebody's been a champion for affordable housing in our city and someone I look up to a great deal as well. So it's great to be with you. I'm here to just provide an update on the efforts related specifically to the homelessness emergency and our focus on unsheltered homelessness. It's helpful that Larry situated that within a much larger context. We are in the midst of an affordable housing crisis nationally, and that's the situation that we step into. Denver has long been grappling with how we address homelessness, and we have a whole continuum of the way that we do that. During the first 6 months of Mayor Johnson's administration, we've made a particular focus on unsheltered homelessness, but that is not the entire story. That is not the entire work that the city is doing around housing and homelessness. And you might have heard about our 1,000-person goal. Well, guess what? Come December 31st, when we've brought 1,000 people indoors, the work won't be over. It will continue on, and we'll have a lot of work still left to do. So I offer that as my introduction, but we can go ahead and go to the next slide. I don't know if there's a, okay, great. So on July 17th, Mayor Johnston was sworn into office. On July 18th, he declared a state of emergency, particularly on unsheltered homelessness, and set a goal to bring 1,000 people indoors by the end of this year. And so just so that folks are familiar, every year there's a point in time count that's done all across the country. That is static information. It's like if you take a snapshot with your cell phone, it doesn't tell the whole story of everything that's going on. It tells what you could see within the photo. It's not a video. It's not live action. It doesn't get what's outside of that frame, but it's a snapshot, the best we can guesstimate about what happened on a single night in homelessness. In the January 2023 point in time count, we counted that there were 1,423 people sleeping outdoors. That's how many we counted, okay? That is not the full snapshot, and that's not the full story. That was one night. But that is sort of the sense of about how many people were sleeping on the streets in Denver that night. And so our goal is to make a significant reduction in terms of encampments around the city. And so this effort has been about two things. It's been about helping to identify back-end resources that we can move people from encampments into, and then it's also been about closing those encampments to future camping. And so being able to move to an encampment, identify places for people to go, move those people indoors, and then be able to close that encampment in the future. And you can go to the next slide. I'll talk about a few of the strategies that we've utilized, really building from the bottom as the foundation. This is what we call an encampment resolution model. But basically taking a geographical approach, targeting a particular encampment, identifying all the people there, getting to know them, building a by name list, understanding how many people are there, and then helping them move to indoor locations. And so the types of indoor locations that we've been working on are the micro communities, which are tiny home villages, about 40 to 60 units generally that include, in this case, 24-hour staffing and wraparound services on site, hotel conversions as well. And so we have both acquired hotels since July 17th, as well as we have entered into master leases with hotels where we're leasing up an entire space. And so been able to bring people indoors in that way. And then we're also working on actual leased units for people, both directly from the streets as well as through the micro communities and hotels. We have a number of resources that we're utilizing, including rapid rehousing, a new allotment of state housing vouchers, local housing vouchers, as well as some partnerships with the private sector in terms of actually locating available units that are open on the market and being able to place people in there as well. And so those are sort of our strategies for getting people indoors. But really it's been all about the deployment of this encampment resolution model. Prior to the Johnston administration, we had never taken quite this geographical approach and said, we're gonna go to an encampment, and then instead of just moving it down the block, we're actually going to work to bring everyone in that encampment indoors, and then we're gonna close it. And so as of today, we've now done that 4 times across the city. Today we brought about 145 people indoors from an encampment at 21st and Curtis as that site was closed. So that is exciting, yeah. We can go ahead and hit the next slide. So this is a little bit hard to see, but back in August, we started talking about a number of sites around the city and started having concentrated conversations in neighborhoods. And so these are the sites that are moving forward for 2023 that by the end of this year we'll be moving people into most of the sites that are on the screen. And so I'll kind of start up here in the top and work around counterclockwise and tell you about these sites. But at the top right, this is a site that's in the Montbello neighborhood. It is a former hotel that the city has acquired. It's been a project that was in the works for a long time. It was recently acquired, and we are putting a 54-unit micro-community in the parking lot there. Long-term, that building will have 95 units of supportive housing in the hotel, but right now we're putting a micro-community in the parking lot at that location. As you move to the left, there's a hotel that's the former Doubletree Hotel at 4040 Quebec Street. It has 300 rooms. We moved the first people into that site today. Just above that is a former Best Western hotel that's 195 rooms. That was acquired by Denver Housing Authority in late July. And that site has been filled through the encampment resolution model. As you move over to the left, this is the most recent hotel that we've announced. That is a Radisson hotel that we have a master lease agreement that we're working on. That is moving its way through City Council right now. It'll be in Safety Committee on the 13th, which is next week, and then would be on the full floor on the 18th if everything moves forward on that. In the middle, there's a micro community right here in Council District 10 in the Golden Triangle neighborhood. That site will be 44 units of tiny homes. It will be run by an organization called The Gathering Place, and it will serve particularly women and trans-identified individuals. And then as you move down to the bottom, there's another 60-unit micro-community in Council District 7. And then across to the right in Council District 4 is a 205-unit hotel that we're bringing online as well. We believe that's the first city-contracted site in Southeast Denver, and so something that we're excited about. One of our goals in this initiative was to really work on geographical distribution across the city. That's really hard to do, I'll just say that. But it has been a focus of ours, and so that shelter site in Southeast Denver is one that we're excited about in terms of being able to distribute this. But a couple things that I'll point out is actually what you see around these sites are the census tracts. So the red dotted lines are the census tracts. And so something to know, of the census tracts that all these sites are located in, the average income is about $95,000 per household, which is about $18,000 higher than the median income across the city. And so the income of these census tracts is higher than sort of the citywide income. Also, 5 of these 7 sites, the census tract is by and large whiter and less Hispanic than Denver as a whole as well. And so one of the focuses of the administration of the city, of many of us, is on equity. I will name that generally the pattern of these sites follows what's called the inverted L. However, the story isn't all good or bad, just along the lines of the inverted L. Actually, as I shared, these are by and large higher income and by and large whiter and less Hispanic than the city as a whole when you look at the census tract data around these sites. You can hit the next one. So I wanted to provide an update on this initiative. We spend a lot of time just kind of talking at a high level about what we're doing and what the plan looks like, and then we go to particular neighborhoods and get in detail about the sites that we're bringing forward. But to me, this is the good news. This is what our schedule looks like over the month of December. And so these are all the different move-in dates that are moving forward. And so one of those happened today, as I mentioned. We had 100 rooms available today that we were working to move people into, and brought about 140 people indoors. And we're going to keep doing that over the course of the next month. And so it's a very busy month for our team. We are taking off from December 22nd through 26th, so everybody's getting a little holiday in the middle of all this activity. But it'll be a very busy month as we're working to move people indoors. And in terms of the goal, by the end of the month, we do expect that we will have moved 1,000 people indoors, which is great. But as I mentioned, that's not the end. And the reality is that this is about serving people. It's about offering people dignity. It's about the belief that we hold that we have a moral obligation to house everyone in Denver. And so we are working to bring people indoors into these locations. And then through case management, through supportive services, through the housing resources that we've been focused on bringing online, then being able to connect them to longer-term permanent housing from these sites as well. And so in the next year, the focus will be, once these people have come indoors, how do we help them get connected to permanent housing? and how do we continue that throughput strategy even while we work to bring a few more hotels and micro communities online in 2024 as well. And so you can hit the next slide. Also just wanted to highlight that there's ways for people in the community to be involved in this. And so corresponding to every move-in day, we do have volunteer opportunities. This is being organized through an organization called Spark the Change, but you can find out how to volunteer if you go to denvergov.org/volunteer1000. And so if you choose to volunteer at a move-in day, you can help someone move into their new unit. You can be at the new site to receive them and help carry their bags to their rooms. But there's also efforts that are taking place on weekends, on Saturdays in particular throughout this month. Last Saturday, we had an event at that former Doubletree Hotel where we did a live mural painting and kind of did a paint-by-numbers community-based mural at that site. We also just wrote welcome notes to people. People signed a banner so that when folks walked into that hotel today, it said "Welcome Home," and was signed by the community. I remember that when I was working at Colorado Village Collaborative, and we had a site down the street at the Park Hill United Methodist Church. There were a group of neighbors that, in the midst of a very tough community conversation, said, "Hey, we want to put up a sign that shows our values," and so they just put up a sign that said "Welcome Home" and left pins, and people as they would walk by would sign that, and so that was a little bit of the inspiration for what we did at Doubletree. But there's opportunities for folks to continue to participate in that over the next few weeks as well. I think that's potentially my last slide. Can maybe hit the next one just to double check me. But I'm here to have a conversation. This is a small enough room that I think we can chat and welcome all thoughts and opinions.
Before you do, I forgot one thing.
Okay, great.
I'm going to ask Cole afterwards. I was supposed to ask him first. We're recording this. If Cole allows us to, it's up to him. If he is allowed, we'll post it on public space on our Facebook page.
Yeah.
If he doesn't, we can go lower. We have some people in the men's group that were not able to attend tonight, and we send them that link. But I also should tell you in the audience that, so when we go to questions and answers, that I guess my ethical and legal side says you should know that. Is that correct? So I will start out with one question before we start the questions. What sort of pressure have you felt in your role and the staff that the mayor promised 1,000 by December 31st?
Yeah, well, I certainly would like to keep feeding my children in January, and so I've been motivated to help achieve my goal. That's, partly a joke, I guess.
Yeah.
But I think there's been pressure to help rise to this moment. But for me, not to center myself in the midst of it, but this is my life's work. It's what I'm committed to. It's what I love doing. And so it's just been a great opportunity to be a part of a transformational project in the city that has the chance to impact, hundreds of people that are struggling and have felt a lack of hope in their day-to-day life generally. So it's been just an incredible opportunity to be a part of it. But yeah, sometimes it feels tough, and there's been a lot of hard community conversations. Like I mentioned, 60 town halls over the last however many days, and it is a hard conversation, and there's many ways to go about addressing this, and we haven't done everything right, but we've worked really hard every single day with the focus in mind of helping offer people safety and dignity. So,
and then one more follow-up. Are you involved with other people in the administration with the mayor's initiative to try to get a certain amount of affordable housing throughout Denver? Is that part of your responsibility, or is it someone else's?
So it's not directly part of my responsibility right now. This has been my initial charge, is to help take on this project and lead this project. Our Department of Housing Stability is the agency in the city that focuses on affordable housing development all across that spectrum. The mayor set a goal on the campaign to also help develop 3,000 permanently affordable housing units per year. And so there's a team of people that are thinking about, what is the work required in terms of that goal as well. That will be one of the main priorities of the administration moving forward. But, when the mayor ran, his top priority was addressing homelessness. And he went to forums night after night after night and said, there's this thing I'm going to do if you elect me. And so this was sort of what he came running out of the gates to do, was to address this problem in this way. And, in the background, there's work on other priorities, including that affordable housing goal as well.
And we'll open it up to questions. We have a kind gentleman in the back who's going to pass a microphone. Please make sure you hold it close to your face, especially if you speak softly.
So I'd just like you to reiterate, what was the number you said on the day you did the snapshot? How many were unhoused
Sure.
or
So,
homeless?
yeah, great question. So the point in time count, like I mentioned, is one data source. There are a number of ways that we look at that data in terms of the total number of people experiencing homelessness. There's people in emergency shelters, people in transitional housing programs. I was speaking specifically about the number of people that are unsheltered, meaning had no place to go, or sleeping outside or in a vehicle or in a tent. And there were 1,423 in the January 2023 point in time count.
Hey, first of all, thank you for coming.
Yeah.
And my question is, when you go to maybe an encampment to gather people, perhaps, I'm not sure how to say that, but that you're going to now offer a shelter, what kind of reaction do you get? I
Yeah.
imagine it's a range. I ask in my own experience with trying programs, I know trying to offer health care to people, it's not just a matter of like you build it and they will come.
Yeah.
There's distrust, there's things that other barriers.
Yeah. So I think first, let me be clear that I'm not the one doing that work. And the people that are doing that work have a lot more skill than I do and have been deeply embedded in that community. They spend all of their time, our outreach teams, day to day on the streets, building relationships with people. And that is really the currency of how we're effective in terms of being able to bring people indoors. The amazing thing about this initiative is that as we've rolled this out, in every camp that we've showed up to, it's a multi-day process. It's not just like, okay, get in, we're going to the hotel today. They show up, they start to build rapport, they get to know people, they put people on a by name list, and they start talking about what the option is. They show people photos, they describe the services, they help people become as familiar as possible. Basically, every single person has accepted the service that's being offered when it's delivered through this method so far. It's just really been astonishing that when we have showed up to a camp and built a by name list and talked about what the indoor option is in these non-congregate shelter hotels, these micro communities, people have said, yes, we want to come indoors. Obviously, everybody wants permanent housing, and we're not able to offer that right this moment. But we know that these dignified, more autonomous sites are really what people are after. And there's years of data showing that people on the streets want to be housed. It takes the right program at the right time. But the problem all along has really just been that we haven't had the scale we need. Like, we know that housing ends homelessness, supportive housing is the best practice. And so it's a matter of being able to deliver that service at the scale we need. But when we've showed up into these camps, it's just been astonishing to see the uptake. So it's been really amazing.
Okay, why do you have 4 hotels on Quebec almost right against each other? I mean, you have such a huge concentration. I go to Quebec Square on occasions,
Yep.
and I'm going to tell you, there's a lot of, I assume they're homeless people, loitering around,
Yep.
bothering people. Actually, Home Depot now has a message saying, don't bother the
Yeah.
shoppers there. And I've seen a couple of things happening at some of the stores, and I believe these people are homeless. And I'm just trying to figure out, Denver is a big, huge area,
Yeah.
and you have several hundred of these people in one small area. That doesn't make sense to me. Don't tell me about this, these people are earning $95,000. That doesn't make sense. You shouldn't
Sure.
have that many people in a concentrated area. I don't see any extra police or any, well, actually, I don't
Yeah.
see any police at all. Now, I'm sure most of these homeless people are nice and harmless, but you also have a few bad elements out there. And I'm saying, what are you doing to protect the community?
Yeah, great question. Can we go back to the map slide? So this is something we've spent a lot of time talking about. I think I've been to, 8 to 10 community meetings about the Quebec Square sites in particular. If you look at the map, I want to talk about what we have been doing as part of this initiative. So these two that are up here, the former Best Western's 4595 Quebec, and the former Doubletree is 4040 Quebec. Those are the two sites that we've brought on as a part of this initiative. There is another site that has been operating as a homeless shelter, really started at some point during the pandemic, has kind of been a homeless shelter off and on, but certainly an operating homeless shelter since January of 2023. That is it's a Comfort Inn site, and so that's also in that area. Another site that we hear a lot about is the Fusion Studios site that's also on Quebec. It's a supportive housing building that's operated by Colorado Coalition for the Homeless. So there is a lot in that part of town. I do want to be clear that what we have brought on are these two particular sites, and some of those were pre-existing. We recognize that that's a challenge, and one of the focuses of this overall initiative, as I mentioned, has been about geographical distribution, and we know that when there's a serious concentration, it can be really difficult. We're working really closely with the police department in that district as we're thinking about how this rolls out as these new sites come online. As I mentioned, the 4040 Quebec site just started accepting guests for the first time today. We are working with the community on a good neighbor agreement. We're having conversations with the community about additional community investments as well. And so that will be an ongoing and iterative process. I think one of the other challenges that we're facing, obviously as a city, is the migrant crisis, right? And so just this week, we surpassed over 30,000 migrants that have come to the city since December of last year. And the demographics on the migrants have shifted. We're now seeing more families, we're seeing more people with children that are coming, and people that are coming to the city and not necessarily trying to get to the next location, but actually intending to stay in Denver. We're starting to see migrant families in encampments as well, which is a real significant challenge. A lot of the activity around the Home Depot on Quebec is related to some of that migrant crisis, and so we certainly are seeing the intersection of those ideas. I think one of the challenges we have in terms of police capacity in our city is that police across the city are responding to something like 8,000 calls a year to encampments. Part of the strategy here is that if we can reduce that activity, that police activity responding to encampments, we can free up police to do other types of work. And in the mayor's budget, there was an allotment to do something like 160 new officers in 2024 as well. And so in addition to homelessness being a focus, public safety is a focus of the administration. That's someone else's work, not mine. But I guess I just want you to know that we hear that concern from the community. It's something that we're prioritizing. And I can't stand here today with all of the answers to that, but we're committed to staying in that conversation with the community and ensuring that this moves forward in a way that's successful. I think one thing that you can know is that each of these 7 sites are going to be sites that the mayor and the administration care a great deal about, and we care a great deal about the success of them, and that means the success of the surrounding community. And so we will continue to prioritize that and your safety as well. I'm not good at calling on people, so.
Well,
Great.
I got the microphone. So it wasn't obvious to me ahead of time, but I've come to understand that a lot of these encampments have aspects of genuine community. And how does that play into your plans?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, obviously people that are living on the streets, I think one thing that I would say is that when someone winds up sleeping on the street in a tent, it's because a lot of the social fabric around their life has fallen apart, right? Like If I lost my job, didn't have income, I have people that I could call. There are many steps before I would wind up sleeping on the streets in downtown Denver, right? And so somebody that has wound up on the streets doesn't have a lot of social fabric. A lot of times that is rebuilt for people in communities of encampments. Now, some communities are safer and healthier than others. We all have friends that are good to be around and friends that aren't good to be around. And so that's not to say that necessarily everybody that lives in an encampment, everybody gets along and works together really well. But people do sort of self-select into some of the encampments that they find themselves in. And so a piece of this strategy is also to help move communities together rather than just taking someone and putting them in a unit all across town where they're separate from the community that they've come to know and trust. And so what we have done when moving an encampment is be able to keep people together. I think where we want to be sort of in the long term of this encampment resolution model is to be able to go to an encampment and present people with multiple options. And so not just to say, well, all of you need to go to this one hotel, but to say, hey, we have these 4 or 5 different options. One of them is even a housing unit for you, and give people that choice at the street level. That's where we would like to be able to go as this continues to move forward. But there has been intentionality around a strategy to give people an option to stay together with the communities of people that they trust.
John, after you hand that part of the room, we've got questions right here next. We'll get you 3 next.
So I'll take the next one. Thank you. I understand that Houston has been very successful in moving people into housing.
Yep.
Could you comment on what they're doing and whether you're trying to replicate any of those activities?
Yeah, great question. So Houston, I think, were some of the pioneers in this encampment resolution model, meaning that they utilized this geographic-based approach, went to encampments and helped identify back-end housing resources for people, and then have been able to keep those encampments permanently closed. That's not really something that was being done much across the country, and Houston was a leader in that initiative. It's now starting to pick up more and more. I went to a convening of mayors in Los Angeles about a month ago. Los Angeles has a huge homelessness problem. I think 40,000 unsheltered people in the city of Los Angeles, so 1,400 sounds like nothing compared to that. But when Mayor Karen Bass took over in LA, they also started this encampment resolution model over the last year. Her first year in office, they've closed 30 encampments and brought 2,000 people indoors utilizing that model. But Houston really led that, sort of generated what that model looked like. And then a couple of other things I think that have been different about the Houston model or are interesting. Their model hasn't so much focused on the hotels and micro communities piece. They've taken people straight from encampments into housing, but they have different levels of affordable housing than we do in Denver. For one, there's no zoning code in the city. There's also just more naturally occurring affordable housing. Houston is a huge, sprawling metropolis, and so they have had more luck at being able to move people directly into permanent housing and also do that through sort of private sector landlord relationships as well. And so there's elements that we have looked at and learned about prior to the Johnson administration, the Department of Housing Stability, and took a trip and learned about that model and had been working with consultants on the encampment resolution model. And so it's something we've been learning from in Denver for a while. After Mayor Johnson was elected, there was a small group of us that also went and learned from Houston before we came into office in July.
Hi, Cole. Thanks for being here and
Yeah.
talking to us about all of this. I just wanted to check real quick. In the newspaper, it said that there are approximately 900 folks that were going to be moving into the Northeast Park Hill area. Was that a correct figure?
I wouldn't say it would be that high. If you go to, so if you look at this slide, in Council District 8, which is where Northeast Park Hill is, you have this micro community At the top right, that's 54 units, maybe 60 people will move in there. The one in the middle is the 4040 Quebec Street Hotel. It's a 300-unit hotel. We're actually activating 289 of those rooms because of the way we're laying it out with putting staff offices on every floor and things like that as well. And then the other is a 194-unit hotel. So I'm not doing all the math, but not quite 900.
That you're referencing the article that Kara DeGette wrote in the Greater Park Hill News. So we should check. I'll check with Kara.
All right, we'll have to fact check her.
Yeah, exactly.
Cause a significant amount of alarm. And then just sort of a follow-on question to that. Once people are inside, you're talking about wraparound services.
Yeah.
I understand that's probably like mental health,
Yeah.
everything, financial, all that kind of stuff. What is the plan moving forward? Is this going to be, those hotels are going to be providing that service indefinitely?
Yeah.
Or is this kind of like a temporary thing?
Yeah, great question. So some of the hotels that we have acquired, they'll be used in this non-congregate shelter hotel capacity for a handful of years. And then some of them will actually go through the low-income housing tax credit process and become permanent supportive housing. And so they'll be immediately used in this way, but will become long-term housing. Some of the hotels that maybe we have a master lease on, that's a little bit unknown. We might still acquire those, or they might just be leased long-term, or at some point they might return to being a normal operating hotel. That seems a little less likely, but the ones that we have acquired, we do generally have plans to convert those to supportive housing. And one example is that site in the far right, where we're doing a micro community in the parking lot now, but it's going to become 95 units of supportive housing in the future. So that's kind of some of the long-term plan on those sites. In terms of the services, I think we should just name that these are really hard frontline jobs to work. So if you thought it would be easy to have a career in homeless services, that would not be true. And so these jobs don't always pay super well, and it's really hard work to be doing day in and day out. And so that means we have a hard time staffing up sometimes. We need more capacity in the space. We need more people that are going into careers, and we need to be able to pay people well enough to make careers in this field. So the model really revolves around peer services, around case management. And so peer services are folks that have lived experience, that have peer certified specialists that are able to work sort of directly with individuals and help them navigate towards care. Case management really looks at everything from, are people on the benefits they need to be on? Are they getting access to employment services? What's their path towards housing, and are they doing housing navigation? And are they connecting to mental and physical and behavioral health and substance misuse services as well? And so case management and that peer service are sort of the center of the model, but then we are also on these sites delivering physical health services, behavioral health services, and substance misuse services. We have a contract with the Colorado Coalition for the Homeless to do that around these various sites on site. And we're also partnering with Caring for Denver Foundation to bring additional on-site substance misuse supports as well. But that's also like something that's nice to say and is hard to deliver the quality that we want. And so that will be a continuous work to help it become the quality of service that we know folks need and deserve.
Hi, thanks. My question is in regarding to, I guess, substance and alcohol use. Is there going to be a policy regarding banning that use, or how does that work?
Yeah.
If somebody comes, will there be alcohol and drug use allowed, or is it going to be not allowed, or
Yeah.
how is that going to be handled?
Yeah, great question. So the data really shows that sobriety as a requirement in order to maintain your housing or temporary housing or shelter is not best practice. That often leads to people returning to the streets. It doesn't lead to a decrease in substance use and those sorts of things. And so sobriety is not a condition of living in these sites. Every site does have community guidelines, and so What they try to regulate is more of people's behaviors. We don't want violence. We don't want outbreaks. We want people to feel safe in these communities. And so that's where we tend to focus. And so we focus first on getting people indoors and helping people feel safe. And then from there on those services. And so the case management that I was just talking about, the substance misuse and behavioral health services, those are non-compulsory. People don't have to opt into those in order to stay in the housing or in the temporary shelter, but they do have the opportunity to access those on site. And we know that it takes both. It's not just the roof over the head, and it's not just the service, it's the pairing of those that leads to great outcomes, not only for the individual, but also for our broader community.
Cole, thank you for the information. I was surprised to see that you were talking about 1,432 people. In 2017, when I left the city, it was 5,000. So either people move out of the city or that number has a very specific type of people. Out of those 5,000 in 2017, 30% of them, approximately 33%, one-third, were people with severe alcoholic or drug abuse issues. Another 30%, or one-third, was economically, people that had been laid off or were unable to find jobs. And the other 30%, in those days, we were talking about home free. My question to you is that, is the city digging into the data to see what is the profile of this population? Because it's a multifaceted issue, and different people have different issues and different problems. So the short term, the housing 1,000 people is great, goal is, but we're talking about long-term issues, budget, where the money is going to come from, and how we're going to tackle this thing in the long term.
Yep.
Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, great question. So quick point of clarification, homelessness has not decreased. And so I was specifically talking about the unsheltered count. When you look at the broader count, I believe in the city of Denver, it was like 6,000 to 7,000, but maybe like 9,000 in the metro region. I'm looking to some local experts. So just want to be clear, I was slicing the data on the unsheltered count in particular. Yes, we are absolutely looking at what are sort of the individual causes of homelessness, what are people experiencing, how is that shifting over time. We know that there's a significant drug challenge on our streets. More people have died on the streets this year than ever, according to the medical examiner, and many of those are due to overdose deaths. And so that is a very real part of this challenge that we're also focused on addressing. But one of the things that I want to point out when we think about addressing homelessness is I think we often focus on what were sort of the individual causes of homelessness, and we look at it sort of at that individual data level. There's a great publication that came out in 2022 called Homelessness is a Housing Problem, and they tried to help pull us up a bit, and instead of just look at what were the individual causes that caused someone to fall into homelessness, they said, actually, if we look at it from more of a regional perspective, what were the factors across the nation that caused certain regions to have higher per capita rates of homelessness? And so they looked at the data and they said, in areas where there's high per capita rates of homelessness, were there higher levels of divorce, were there higher levels of substance misuse, were there more people that suffered from job loss in those spaces? And unequivocally, the data showed that no, that was not the case, that there were two contributing factors to high per capita rates of homelessness. One of those was an increased cost of housing, and the other was a decrease in vacancy rates. And so as vacancy rates go down and housing costs go up, homelessness per capita regionally rises. And so I think for me, that's a large part of what I am keeping in front of me, and I think what we're keeping in front of us is that we have an affordable housing challenge, and we have to address homelessness as a housing problem. And connecting that back to this initiative, you talked about how it would be nice to get 1,000 people indoors, but that's not the end, right? And so this is an initial sprint for us, but this is not the end of this work. And frankly, as I shared earlier, it's not the beginning. There's a long history of the way we've been addressing this in Denver. There's a whole continuum of the ways that we approach this challenge based upon people's individual needs, but also based upon the challenges of our region. And so this is where we're working now, but it won't be the end of this story for Denver or for this administration either. Go here.
I have the mic.
Yeah.
I have a comment about the numbers in the article. I think they were including the Denver Rescue Mission that's in this quadrant as well, and the Fusion that have already been up and running, and they're not part of the initiative. So if you add those to the initiative, then you get closer to 900 people. My question, originally you talked about wanting community partnership of some kind or involvement, and I'd like for you to talk more about that. I know I checked at the Fusion and they don't have volunteers there. They wouldn't let me go in. But talk about what you need from the community.
Yeah. So I think what we need from the community is support. It's the holidays. It's the end of the year. We shouldn't have to live in a city where 1,400 people are sleeping on the streets. 1,400 people shouldn't have to sleep on the streets in a city. And we have arguments at times about what's the best way to bring that forward. But I think, to me, the exciting thing about this month in this city is that we have a chance to all move forward in one direction and come together around a really exciting opportunity to move a bunch of people indoors this month. And so it's a chance to come together, and it's a chance to be a part of something special together. And so that slide, right there, shows a bunch of the volunteer opportunities that we have over the next month. Some of those, as I mentioned, are focused on supporting move-in days. Others are doing site prep. We had volunteers today putting smoke detectors in rooms at a hotel that's going to open up, and you don't have to be super skilled to be able to do that. As I mentioned, we also had volunteers that were signing welcome cards and signing a welcome banner. We had volunteers that were putting plants in planters over the weekend, evergreens that are going to sit outside of a hotel when people show up there. And so there's just ways to be involved, and I would encourage you to visit that website if that's something that you're interested in doing or telling your community about that. But really, over the next 30 days or so, it's just an opportunity for us to do something positive together for our community and help reweave some of that social fabric that is missing when someone winds up on the streets. Yep.
Okay. Cole, would you talk about the program vis-a-vis children? And, for example, do all of the units have families with children, or are they concentrated in particular units? And what additional services, is there any way to help link the children up with local schools, that kind of thing?
Yeah, great question. So obviously, homeless families is a challenge in our city. The initial focus of this effort has been on encampments. And so most of what we're seeing in encampments are singles and couples. We're seeing less children with families living in tent encampments on the street. I will say one thing that we have done, that Southeast Denver Hotel is actually going to be a hotel for families. And so right now, there's a hotel that serves families that has about 130 rooms. We're going to be, as we move that site into Southeast Denver, expanding it to 205 rooms. So we are expanding that programming through this initiative or through this effort. But in particular, as it relates to encampments, where we're seeing children on the streets is in the migrant encampments. And That is kind of, it's a new level of that in our city. There's babies in encampments right now out in the cold tonight that have newly arrived in this country. And it's something we're really struggling with and working really hard on solutions. I'm leading the efforts, particularly as it relates to this encampment resolution model and this initiative, but there's a whole team of people that are working every single day as hard as I am on the migrant front. And the place that's intersecting for us is in these encampments where families are showing up on the streets. And so we are working at what our solution looks like there. So yeah, don't have a great answer, but it's a huge problem. Yeah.
Hi, thanks. Another question. In terms of people that are coming from the encampments, how many, is there any data regarding where they're from? Are they actually people who are from Denver, or are they people who have come here from somewhere else?
Yeah, that's a great question. So Metro Denver Homelessness Initiative studies this information in terms of people that flow through our homelessness management information system on an annual basis. I think the latest data I saw was that 84% of people that are experiencing homelessness in Denver were last housed within the region. And so by and large, the overwhelming majority of people that are homeless in our community are a part of our community and have been a part of our community for a long time.
Cole, I have a follow-up question, a difficult one. If a number of people go into a single population and community that do have mental health, alcohol, substance abuse problems, you'd think that there's going to be violence and other things. Is there any way of trying, short of saying you can't have alcohol, which doesn't work, I understand.
Sure.
How do you control that population of a community, or do they control themselves? Do you need more police work, or what's the model say when you bring a community like that indoors?
Yeah. See, the problem with a question and answer format is there's so many other experts in this room, and you guys keep looking at me for all the answers. So I'd love for other voices to chime in if they feel so inclined. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm by no means an expert. My name's Katie Simons. I work as a supportive housing consultant in the Denver area as well as around the country. I mean, I think the crucial, point here, and actually this is maybe a question that needs a little bit more clarity, is around the staffing, right, and the support that is included in these non-congregate models. So that's a question I think, Cole, if you want to speak to further. I think it is part of this model. It's a national model. It's called Housing First, right? It is a best practice. It's something that has lived through many administrations, including, the George Bush administration when this really took off around the country, to say that, we know that forcing people to take part in services or to have, preconditions, if you will, be med compliant or, become sober, doesn't help. And it really furthers, probably furthers the trauma, right, that people are already experiencing. We know that a lot of people use drugs and alcohol to cope from a lot of past traumas, and many people are not able to just stop that form of coping or of survival, even if they do become housed or sheltered. So I think, to Cole's earlier point, housing people first, then looking at what services they might need, being sure that those are wrapped around them. That's always the hardest part because of the availability of our services in our community. I think that it's very hard right now to find behavioral health services that are available. It's hard to find beds that are open if somebody is wanting to go into an inpatient treatment program for substance use. But I think it starts with those relationships. It starts with basic case management. It starts with getting people's basic needs met. And then, I would love to hear more about some of the service providers who are going to be staffing some of these places. Are they going to be providing the services on site? Are they going to be referral sources to other community partnerships on site? I mean, I just think that, I think there's a lot of connection here between use and mental illness and past trauma. And there are a lot of things as well, I think, that oftentimes get overlooked in the conversation, including things like brain injury. So we know that a very large percentage of people who experience homelessness also have a brain injury. It's somewhere around 64% actually. And oftentimes brain injuries can be misdiagnosed as mental illness and then mistreated. And so I think part of it too is really figuring out what is going on with folks in terms of trauma, physical, mental, emotional, brain trauma, and then figuring out the best course of action in terms of providing services. But I'll throw it back to Cole to just kind of answer as well around maybe who will be on site or in the community offering services. I think is also a really important question to know who those organizations are, what the staffing levels are around. Is it 24/7? Is it just during daytime hours? And are people going to be able to go and find that support when they're ready?
And one last. This is Robin, former Councilwoman Kinich that Cole acknowledged. Thank you for that acknowledgement. I think too, we should just maybe be careful about our assumptions that sometimes when we think of the face of homelessness, we think that everybody is chronic and has been homeless for the longest time. I think Jose mentioned that not every person who's experiencing homelessness is mentally ill. Not every person experiencing homelessness does have chronic substance abuse. And some have been using it as a coping mechanism. And so when you house 100 people, it might be that a small number of them are using opioids. A small number of them might be chronically abusing alcohol, and others might be temporarily homeless. They might have just, experienced a loss of housing, and maybe they had no social network, but they were, living on in a hotel on Colfax for the last 2 years, and they just lost their motel in Colfax, and then they ended up on the street. And so they actually maybe haven't been on the street forever, and so they are going to be in a very different place. And maybe mental illness isn't their presenting need. And so not everybody is necessarily at the same, if you use a fancy word, acuity. Not everyone has the same level of seriousness, and not everyone has the same conditions. So I don't want us to assume that of the 100 people in one hotel, every person has the same conditions. There's certainly in that group a mix of people with different lengths of homelessness and different severities. So some will need some very light case management to get IDs and jobs, and simply having a shower and a schedule and a place to be will be the thing they need, and others will need that much more intensive service.
Yeah. See, that's why I called on the people in this room. So just to answer your question, Katie, in terms of these sites, so all these sites have 24-hour kind of shelter staff around the clock, right? Every single site that we've brought on. And that actually wasn't always the case for like the tiny home villages and things like that. So in some ways, that's a step up. There's also at all of these sites case management that is including the navigation services to benefits, employment navigation services, and housing navigation services. I think we're trying to hit like a 1 to 25 person ratio. We still got to hire up to get there, right? But that's the goal in that regard. And then I mentioned also the Colorado Coalition for the Homeless contract to actually, across this network of sites, bring their HOP van. So they'd be going 7 days a week, bringing basically a federally qualified health center on wheels to these sites, which hasn't happened in the past. And then we're also working through some contracts with the Denver Department of Public Health and Environment to then intensify substance misuse and behavioral health supports from there using some contracts that they have. And that's some of the partnership we're doing with Caring for Denver Foundation. Some of that will include telehealth services that people can scan a QR code and basically get access to services anytime they need. But others of it will include more focused and on-site services as well. And so it's a starting point. I'd say it's a step up from like a general micro-community or non-congregate shelter model. It's more in line with some of the services being delivered in supportive housing, not all the way to like an ACT team model or something like that, but we think it's a step in a positive direction.
I had actually a couple questions. One is, since you started housing, have you been like just tracking the turnover? How successful people are at staying, even short term. Obviously, it's not you don't probably have a long term answer yet.
Yeah.
And then the second question is it's really just more of a comment that you can talk about some of the healthcare costs, because I know there've been many demonstrations just showing the amount of money you save in ER and hospital utilization
Yep.
from people who either go there because of the physical results of homelessness, or also just like losing access to health care and preventive and their medicines. And, is that something you guys are able to factor in to your analysis?
Thank you for those questions. So we have a dashboard that's kind of tracking this effort so far. So you can go to denvergov.org/house1000 and find the dashboard. There's a little thermometer that shows how many people have moved in. It's going to go up a lot in the next couple days, so stay tuned. Watch the thermometer tick up. But we are working on kind of a version 2 of that, which will not only show people moved indoors, but will also show some longer term outcomes. And one of the things we're tracking is what percentage of people are still in the program at 30 days, but then beyond that. So like over the course of the lifetime, people that are still indoors that came in through this initiative. So that's something we're gonna keep tracking. We're gonna be public with that data. So far it's over 90, I think it's like 93% of people that we've moved indoors of the 317 prior to today that are still indoors 30 days later. So good initial data, but we wanted to keep that number as high as we can. And then speaking about kind of cost deferment, sort of the gold standard supportive housing study was done in Denver by the Urban Institute on the Social Impact Bond Project, which showed that when we housed the most acute patients, those that had the most ER visits and those sorts of things, that there was cost savings through the intervention in terms of time spent in jail and time spent in ER or detox. As Robin shared, it's not necessarily the case that all 100 people that we moved in today fit that category. And so this is not an exact apples to apples comparison. And we can't necessarily extrapolate those exact same findings or savings. But we do, know and believe that it's better to have people indoors. It's better for their health outcomes. It's better for our community outcomes than to have people on the streets and having to go to emergency rooms for basic services.
Cole has been kind enough. If we have one more pressing question from anybody that hasn't asked a question. Any? There.
I got the mic. First of all, I want to say it is very impressive, your idealism and the number of people in the audience and the thoughtfulness that's gone into this. I had no idea you all have done this kind of research and applied this kind of thoughtfulness to the problem. The other side of it, which I know nothing about, but I'm curious, what about the funding of this? And is this reliant on one-time funding? Is there going to be a steady income stream for these kind of services going forward?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we have, we've talked about our budget a couple of times at City Council for this initiative. We're planning to spend about $48 million in 2023 to sort of get this up off the ground and initially operational. As we move into 2024, the mayor's budget included another $40 million allotment in terms of the ongoing operations and services around these sites. And so that's something that was passed and approved by City Council. The City of Denver has made a historic investment in housing and homelessness over the last several years, partly due to ARPA investment. And so we know that those funds are not going to be there forever. And part of the approach to this effort, we have also launched through the Denver Foundation a Mayor's Housing Fund. And so we're working on some philanthropic approach to this. We have a great path to funding this work in 2024. And we have work to do to figure out what the long-term funding looks like for this effort. We're obviously extremely grateful to Denver voters for having approved the Homelessness Resolution Fund back in 2020. And that is a great long ongoing source of funding for this beyond just our simple general fund. But there's still work to continue as we look at sort of the long-term sustainability of this.
I can't thank you enough. And on behalf of the men's group here, we thank you all for coming. And I didn't introduce our new senior pastor. Would you stand up? This is new to our community, Pastor Larissa Romero. Oh, I was telling Cole that Larissa and her husband and her young child live in Globeville. So she wants to know more about it, and we do as a community. And what we can really do to help Cole and everybody that's working on this is volunteer and help out where we can. If you're a professional, help out even more. So thank you all for, and join us. Thank you very much, Cole. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. All right. Great.